This happened maybe 8 or 9 months after I moved into my first house. I was 24 at the time, fresh out of college, with a decent job. All you need to know about the house is that it had a very spacious basement that I mostly used for storage. The previous owners had partitioned it into these separate rooms using plywood and exposed framing. The main area was right at the bottom of the stairs, with a laundry section off to one side, and what I think was meant to be a workshop. Then there was this odd back room that mostly served as storage. It felt a bit like a maze. You couldn't see the whole basement from one spot, which I thought was pretty cool when I first checked it out. So, it was a weeknight, and I had to head downstairs to do laundry, which was honestly the only time I ever went down there. The basement lights were already on, which struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. I had been down there a few days before, so I figured I must have just forgotten to turn them off. Even with the lights on, the space felt dim. I had damn bothered to replace the old yellow incandescent bulb that was there when I moved in. I started walking down the stairs, and things escalated so abruptly that I couldn't react quick enough. I made it to the bottom of the stairs and started walking toward the laundry area when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. I turned my head instinctively and locked eyes with a man who was crouching behind one of the folding tables that I had set up near the far corner. It was so unsettling that I almost dropped the basket. My brain refused to register what I was seeing. There was literally a stranger hiding in me. Couldn't believe my eyes. There was a stranger in my basement, and I was frozen in place, just staring at this intruder who was glaring back at me. Seriously, he looked like he had just crawled out of a sewer. Then, without warning, he stood up and bolted deeper into the basement, heading toward the partitioned rooms at the back. That was the moment I snapped out of my fear and knew I had to act. And I started moving backwards toward the basement stairs. But I must have wasted too much time, because before I could reach the stairs, all the lights in the basement went out. Until that moment, I had never been down there with the lights off. I hadn't anticipated how dark it would be. It was fully pitch black down there, complete and utter darkness. I mistakenly assumed I knew my own house, so I kept moving toward the stairs. But I must have misjudged something, because I tripped and fell to the floor. By the time I got up, I was totally disoriented. The chaos and fear were just too much for my brain to handle. My phone was upstairs on the counter, so I couldn't just pull it out of my pocket to turn on the flashlight. I started screaming like a madman, hoping it would scare off whoever had broken into my house. But instead, it seemed to pump them up because I could hear screaming from the other side of the basement. It was terrifying. I was yelling into the darkness, trying to sound like a wild person. And then I realized someone else on the other side of the room was doing the exact same thing, and his screaming was much more intimidating than mine. He legitimately sounded like a murderer. I stopped screaming, and he followed suit. I started navigating around the basement purely by touch. I had no other choice, and I started hearing movement behind me. He must have been doing the same. The sounds were getting closer, and amidst the horror of everything, I couldn't help but get the sense that he knew my own basement better than I did. I knew I was getting closer to the stairs, but that basement is massive. I started hearing breathing coming from somewhere behind me. And honestly, I really thought he was going to grab me. After what felt like forever, I finally felt the wooden base of the staircase beneath my feet. I grabbed the railing and bolted up the stairs. But just as I was about to hit the second step, something yanked at my ankle, and I lost my balance. My head smacked into the railing, and I tumbled all the way down to the basement floor. I still couldn't see him, but I could feel him dragging me away from the stairs with this crazy, inhuman strength. I kicked and thrashed with everything I had and somehow connected with something. That hit was just enough for him to lose his grip, and I twisted and twisted until I finally broke free. I sprinted back toward the stairs in the dark, and he started screaming again, but I found them just in time. I made it to the top, burst through the door, and slammed it shut behind me. The nightmare was far from over, though. That door doesn't have a lock, so I had no choice but to press my weight against it and hope I was strong enough to keep him out. Just as I suspected, I heard footsteps pounding up the basement stairs mere seconds later, followed by a huge crash against the door. The door swung open for a terrifying second, and it took everything in my power to push it closed. The first impact must have emboldened him because he started repeatedly slamming into the door. I yanked off my socks and pushed against the door. Knowing my life depended on it, I have no idea how he didn't make it through. but he eventually gave up. I heard footsteps crashing back down the basement stairs, and I immediately seized the opportunity to grab my phone. I dashed over to the counter, grabbed what I needed, and rushed back to the basement door. Pressing my back against it, I called the police. By the time they showed up, that guy was long gone. I had a gut feeling something was off. One of the basement windows had been pried open from the outside, and it didn't take a detective to piece it together. Nothing was stolen, though. One of the officers suggested the intruder might have been using my basement as a hideout. Honestly, that thought hadn't crossed my mind, but it felt way worse than just a robbery. The police also pointed out that the intruders seemed to know where the light switch was, which wasn't in an obvious spot. It all added up. I ended up moving out about 4 months later. Reflecting on it now, I realized that guy was ready to harm me that night. If things had gone differently, who knows what could have happened? It still sends chills down my spine. This happened when I was 14. I'm in my 30s now, so we're talking close to 20 years ago at this point. My parents had to drive out of state for a wedding and didn't want to leave me alone despite the fact that I was staying at home alone age. So, the original plan was for my older sister to stay with me for the weekend. She was already in college at the time, but she only lived an hour away. As soon as my parents left, though, she texted me and told me she had some party to go to and was ungoing to come. I didn't really care. I didn't even bother telling my parents about it, partly because I didn't want to stress them out, and partly because I didn't want them to find someone else to watch me. It wasn't like the house was in some sketchy area either. It was a typical 2-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The place mostly consisted of families, too, so I knew I'd be fine. The evening was completely uneventful. I played Halo for like 6 hours, something I'd ordinarily never get to do. It wasn't until just after midnight where things started getting weird. I was still lounging on the couch when I heard this faint tapping sound. The sound came from somewhere in the backyard, and I immediately assumed it was something hitting the siding of the house. That's honestly what it sounded like, so I wasn't too concerned. A few minutes later, though, I heard it again. The sound was nearly identical, which gave me the impression that it was a tree branch hitting the same spot on the house. But then the tapping migrated like whatever was making it was moving along the side of the house. That's when I knew something was wrong. The sound was far too intentional to not be made by something sentient. I muted the TV and froze. I didn't want to move. I just sat there, listening like anyone would. But then, it was just silence. After about a minute, I told myself it was probably just a scuttling animal, or maybe the wind, so I turned the TV back on. But then, 20 minutes later, a new noise made me way more concerned. It was another tapping sound, but this time, it seemed to be coming from below me, from the basement. The living room was right above it, so it had to be from there. Now, the basement was unfinished, with a little kitchenette in the corner, so it wasn't too far-fetched to think a critter might be rummaging around down there. I muted the TV again and got up from the couch. I dreaded it, but I had to check. I needed to assure myself that nothing was wrong. The basement had a few windows that led outside, so it was likely that the raccoon or stray cat that made the first noise was now knocking against one of those windows for some reason. I tried to calm myself down as I walked over to the basement door. I opened it and stood at the top of the stairs, peering into the darkness. For some reason, I called out hello into the emptiness. The tapping noise was louder now, happening every few seconds. If it had just been an animal, it probably wouldn't have reacted to my voice like that. The tapping stopped immediately, and that's when I started feeling really uneasy. If I could just turn on the lights, I'd get a clearer view of everything. But the light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, and there was no way I was going down there. So, I swung the door closed until it was just a crack open and stuck my hand through. I pointed my phone toward where I thought the window was, closed my eyes, and recorded a video with the flash on for a few seconds. I took a deep breath and pulled up the video. Then I quickly shut the door and locked it. It was pretty grainy, but it took me all of 1 second to realize there was a figure standing underneath one of the windows on the inside of the house. I screamed. I couldn't control myself, and I ran to my room. I locked the door and immediately called my dad, who called the police for me. I was still on the phone with my parents when I started hearing repeated banging on the basement door. That guy was trying to break into the finished part of our house. And then after the 5th or 6th bang or so, there was silence again, and then the police showed up. They searched the basement, but that guy had escaped through the window. The officers were actually nice enough to search our yard, but that guy was long gone. There was a bunch of stuff missing from the basement. Like I said before, it wasn't finished, but that didn't mean my parents left it empty. I can't remember everything that had been stolen, but the scariest thing by far was this. When the police inspected the kitchenette, they found the biggest knife in the rack missing. It was a terrifying thought. If it weren't for the video on my phone, I don't think the police would have taken things as seriously as they did. But of course, nothing ever came of it. And this was almost 20 years ago now. I have no idea what happened to that old phone. If I ever find it and the thing still turns on, I'll submit the footage. It's probably buried in a box of junk in my parents' house somewhere, if it even still exists.